same department. So we had some nice interactions. As I recall, I was the only American woman in the doctoral program in the department at the time. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the adoption of computers by Iowa farmers. And I'm still really, really interested at new analysis that look at how farmers and ranchers make decisions on whether or not to adopt new practices or technologies on their operations. I think that's an underappreciated area of analysis in the economics profession. My first job as an ag economist, as Dr. Goveris mentioned, was with USDA's Economic Research Service. And I have to admit that when I graduated from Iowa State was not a really good time for new ag economists to find a job. At the time, there were very few openings in academia. I interviewed at only one university, and that was Laval University in Quebec. Did not get offered that job. I did end up with 3 job offers, all of them from US agencies of various kinds. And then I took the position at ERS starting in May 1988. The first few years I worked on domestic policy issues for feed grain producers, and then moved fairly quickly into working on trade policy, got promoted to a GS14. Had some really wonderful experiences. Worked on an international outreach to countries in the former Soviet bloc, had the opportunity to travel to both Poland and Czechoslovakia in the early 1990s. I was very much involved in an extensive study on grain quality issues for U.S. agricultural trade. This is my first experience working on a congressional mandate in the early 1990s. And then I was involved in a very intensive sets of analyses on changing U.S. proposals in the under the auspices of the GATT agricultural negotiations in the early 1990s. And I was a part of a large group that received an award from the Department of Agriculture for that work. I believe that ERS is a great place to learn about agricultural policy and its impacts. The next stop, so job number 2, I had an opportunity to work on Capitol Hill. In December 1996, I called up a former graduate student colleague of mine from Iowa State. His name is Pat Westoff. He had recently left the Senate Ag Committee to go work at FAPRI at the University of Missouri. And at the time, I asked Pat if they had filled his old position yet. He said they had not, but he was scheduled to talk to the new incoming staff director for the Democratic staff later that day and offered to mention me as a potential candidate. Needless to say, I said yes. And within 3 months, I had a new job as the chief economist for the Democratic staff of the Senate Ag Committee in March 1997, starting exactly 9 years to the day after I started at ERS. At the time I was hired for this position, I believe that I was the first woman to have ever worked as an economist on either the House or Senate Agriculture Committees. Since that time, the House Ag Committee Democratic staff has had 2 other women serve in the same role. When I started in March 1997, we were in the minority, so we did not have control over the agenda, and we had a much smaller budget. So I was handed a pretty substantial portfolio to work on early on. So I was just not responsible for tracking the budgetary and economic costs of farm programs, but I had a very substantial legislative portfolio. I worked on commodity programs, trade policy, crop insurance, agriculture biotechnology, farm credit issues, and also worked on renewable energy, conservation, and climate change at various times during the 14 years I was on the committee. And then in the start of the 107th Congress in 2001, the Senate was split 50-50, and the Republicans had control of the Senate because the vice president at the time was Dick Cheney, and he served the role as a tiebreaker in his role as president of the Senate. But then in May 2001, so a few months later, Senator Jim Jeffords from Vermont left the Republican Party and became an independent senator who caucused with the Democrats. And this flipped control of the Senate and put Democrats in charge. So my boss, Tom Harkin, who had at the time been the ranking minority member on the Senate Ag Committee, became chairman just as the work on the new farm bill got underway. Because we had more resources then, we were able to expand our staff. And my boss actually hired 2.5 people to take on some of the policy issues that I had previously handled. So it lightened my load a bit, but I still had a lot of work to do. Interesting things about the 2002 Farm Bill that I worked on. It was most notable for restoring a counter-cyclical element to the farm safety net, which had been eliminated in the previous Farm Bill in the 1996 Farm Bill. This came about because a major Asian financial crisis that started in 1998 had devastated U.S. agricultural export markets, which led Congress to authorize massive ad hoc payments to farmers to offset losses over the late 90s, early 2000s, totaling $30–40 billion across those years. So the 2002 Farm Bill made this countercyclical payment a formal part of the Title I commodity support structure. I would have to say my own personal contribution that I think was most important in the 2002 Farm Bill was helping to write the permanent language for the authorization of the McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program. This had been piloted at USDA in 2000. And as of 2024, this program, so within 20 some years, this program had served more than 3.7 billion meals in African schools alone. And one of the real goals of this program was to help girls in developing countries, in particular, stay in school for longer. And we know from research that when a girl in a developing country gets a chance to get some secondary education, they have much, much greater earning potentials than those women who never had such opportunities. So that's pretty important. And this is a photograph of George W. Bush signing the 2002 Farm Bill. And I remember this distinctly because he did it at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And so we had to get up really, really early to attend this event. And then the second Farm Bill that I worked on was the 2008 Farm Bill. Unlike the 2002 Farm Bill, which I just described, where there was a budget resolution which gave our committees more than $70 billion over baseline over a 10-year period to fund priority programs, this time we had to generate our own offsets. And the main source of those offsets was a deal between Senator Max Baucus, who is not only a member of the Agriculture Committee, but chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and Representative Charlie Rangel from New York, who was chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. They came up with a deal to generate $10 billion in funds that would go to the ag committees out of a modest percentage of the revenues generated annually through customs fees. And as a result of this deal between the committees, we ended up with the Farm Bill being a vehicle for a number of tax and trade positions that had little or no connection to agriculture. And then we also had to add a small business administration disaster assistance program to the bill. Because of the relatively modest funds that we got through this Ways and Means Finance offset, this Farm Bill was far less ambitious in its changes than had been the 2002 Farm Bill. And a big chunk of the offset was eaten up by a set of standing ag disaster programs that Mr. Baucus insisted on adding. And since he was the one bringing the new money into the Farm Bill, we kind of had to go along with it. And some of the additional funding also went to bolster the nutrition program, the SNAP program. I worked on several titles of this Farm Bill. Crop insurance, this was the very first time that it had been formally handled in a Farm Bill. Trade title, and I had the opportunity to draft and get enacted a pilot program to test the concept of local and regional procurement for food aid programs, and then also worked on the commodity title. We created a revenue-based alternative to the price support program, but it wasn't very lucrative, and not a lot of farmers ended up adopting it. Interestingly, the 2008 Farm Bill was actually vetoed by President Bush, but his veto was roundly overridden by Congress, so it did become law. After we finished the 2008 Farm Bill in June, I had more time to look into how U.S. ag development efforts could be revitalized in light of what was going on in the global food market in terms of the spike in commodity prices. I worked with counterparts on the staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and some partners in the NGO community to draft language to relax existing restrictions on how that limited how USAID could allocate funds for ag development. Under the Bumpers Amendment, which had been added to the appropriations bill every year since about 1986, this provision barred USAID from helping developing countries with ag development that might help that sector in that developing country emerge as a competitor to U.S. farmers. And the modifications to bumpers that I helped to draft with my colleagues were adopted after I left the Senate, and they're now part of law. And that provision exempts the very poorest countries in the world from having to meet this requirement. And then in 2011, I made a big jump. For me, I had really enjoyed working on the Senate Agriculture Committee. It's almost my perfect job in so many ways. However, it was very demanding in terms of time and energy. During the farm bills, which I mentioned, we worked on 2 of them during the time I was on the committee. It was quite typical to spend 60 hours or more a week on the job, including working many evenings and some weekends. And then in 2009, we went through a change in leadership in the committee. Tom Harkin moved to chair another committee, so Senator Blanche Lincoln from Arkansas became chair. And then a little more than a year later, Senator Lincoln lost her reelection. So I thought it was a good time at this point to make a career change, and I was able to retire from the Senate in early 2011. Retiring from the Senate allowed me to both collect a decent pension from the federal government and also stay on the federal healthcare system, which gave me the flexibility to not have to accept the very first job that I might be offered. So between 2011, the time I retired, and 2014, which is when I started working for the Farm Journal Foundation, I wrote a few policy papers on a variety of ag policy issues as a consultant. I spent about a year lobbying Congress on an animal welfare issue that was very interesting, and also advised a coalition of humanitarian groups on how to pursue food aid reform. And then in 2014, I was offered and accepted a job with the Farm Journal Foundation, which is a nonprofit devoted to bolstering food security by advocating for more federal funds for ag research and development. So this is really my kind of third career. If you start with USDA and then the time on Capitol Hill, Farm Journal Foundation is the number 3 here. And I'm still working with Farm Journal Foundation after nearly 11 years, although I did switch to a half-time position in 2018 so I could pursue occasional outside projects with more freedom. And these are the things that kind of drive my work in this area. Out of roughly 700 million people around the world who are food insecure, at least half of them are smallholder farmers or members of their households, which means that despite the fact that they live on the land, they lack sufficient knowledge or access to key resources that would allow them to feed their family members well over the course of the entire year. And most notably, among these smallholder farmers, women farmers have even less access to these resources than do their male counterparts. And this chart is kind of the numbers that drive the work, and that reflects the spending of the U.S. government on agriculture development assistance, official development assistance, since 1960. And as you can see, there was a big drop off starting in the 1980s, bottoming out early in the 2000s. And the United States was not the only one that was kind of backing away from these investments. And within a few years after we hit bottom on these numbers, we saw the consequences of that in the food price crisis that was so disastrous, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, because the drop off in ag research funding had caused their crop yields to stagnate. And so they were even more vulnerable to the shock than they otherwise would have been. And so I worked on, and a lot of other folks have been working on trying to bolster funding in this areas, and we saw some pretty substantial gains, leveled off until the last few years. And of course, now we're facing another disastrous drop off because of what's going on in the current elimination of the U.S. Agency for National Development. What do we do at the Farm Journal Foundation? Well, one particular thing I want to talk about is our Farmer Ambassador program. So my earliest work at Farm Journal Foundation consisted of recruiting active U.S. farmers to take part in their program of advocacy with key federal policymakers from their home states on what they saw as the value of ag research and development. We call it the Farmer Ambassador program, and we now have 38 farmers in 29 states enrolled in the program. And even though U.S. farmers are overwhelmingly white and male, we made a point of recruiting minority and women farmers for our programs to make sure we're able to represent diverse viewpoints and voices in our activities on the Hill. And I give credit to our farmers, their engagement with Congress in those first few years, with helping to get the first version of the Global Food Security Act enacted in 2016. My CEO, Tricia Beal, refers to our Farmer Ambassador program as our secret sauce because it gives us a capacity that few other organizations of our kind have. So that's sort of my career in a 15-minute nutshell, and looking forward to Happy's questions. I wanted to share this. This is a map of the farmers, where our farmer ambassadors are located from. And it's kind of hard to see individual farmers, but I will tell you that out of the 38 farmer ambassadors, 19 are women. We have 3 who are Native Americans, 1 African American, a couple of Hispanic Americans, and 1 of Asian Americans. So we have a very diverse group in our program. And here's my contact information if anybody wants to reach out to me after this presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. My name is Happy Daudi. I'm a woman in agricultural science and development. I work with the summit as a plant breeder in a dryland crop improvement program. I was eager to interview Dr. Mercier because she operates in a vital sector where women remain underrepresented. Yet their involvement significantly imply the impact of our work. To begin with, Stephanie, could you share what changes you have observed over the course of your career regarding women's role in agricultural policy making?
Well, during the course of my lifetime, Happy, we had the first two women serving as Secretary of Agriculture in the United States. So that is a significant gain, I would have to say. And following my being hired as chief economist for Senate Ag in 1997, the House Ag Committee has also had a couple women work in that role. So there's more direct engagement in policy at that level. And I think that people are more and more conscious of the fact that we have a saying in the United States that if you're not at the table, you may be on the menu. And so women are starting to recognize that they need to be part of the decision-making process in order to make sure that their views are represented.
Thank you. You have been one of the few women in the field of policy advising, especially in the big forum. How do you work to ensure that women's voice are included in the development of various policies?
Well, you when you're in those rooms with the opportunity to talk about agriculture policy, you need to make sure that you have command of the facts. I mean, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be listened to, but you certainly, if you don't know what you're talking about, they will dismiss you out of hand. And so come in armed with facts, with data, and hopefully you'll get a hearing at least.
Do you believe that the agricultural policies in place today effectively reach women and help improve their livelihood and nutrition, or we need to improve it?
I think that they're starting to move in the right direction on that issue. Unfortunately, I think a lot of that progress may have been halted by what's going on in terms of the disassembling of the U.S. Agency for International Development. It is not clear yet what functions of USAID are going to end up still being in place under the State Department, and so this is very much a period of uncertainty and really a limbo. Not only for the people who work at USAID, so obviously that's very key for them, but for the programs that they were managing. And it's very disturbing to watch this process because nobody, I don't think, really saw this coming. And so there was really no time to prepare for it in advance.
Dr. Mercier, do you have involved in the development of a policy yet you feel it could negatively affect farmer livelihood?
Well, I mean, certainly there are valid questions about whether or not the programs that we operate that are designed to help farmers support their incomes may actually have a detrimental effect on some of the smaller scale production farms, not just in the United States, but around the world. Because, well, for example, in the United States, we have programs which are pretty lucrative, which provide price support or revenue support to farmers. But because of the way the programs are designed, the bulk of those payments go to a very small group of very large and frankly very affluent producers, and a very much smaller share goes to the other farmers. And when you have a small group of farmers receiving the bulk of payments, that also tends to elevate the cost of inputs, especially land, because that's a scarce resource, especially in the United States. And if the price of land goes up, That means that, for example, a young farmer who wants to get into the business will have a much harder time acquiring the land and other inputs that he needs to start work. And so that's really problematic from my point of view. Is that good intentions of these programs often have adverse impacts.
As a woman, do you think there are challenges that come with being a woman working in agricultural policy making or policy advisors? There is any challenge as a woman?
Well, I was never really conscious of going into a field that there were so few women in until I started showing up in the conference rooms and seeing that I was one of only one or two women there. And it made the task a little more daunting, I'll admit, but I do want to share some insight that I gathered when I was working, especially on the Senate Agriculture Committee staff. And it may seem kind of trite, but I think it's really effective. If you're a woman in a field in agriculture that's dominated by men, it is really, really helpful for you as a woman to have at least some understanding of sports, because you can engage with your colleagues on a social level, talking about how the World Cup is going, or how what's going on with preparation for the Super Bowl in the United States, and that sort of puts your male colleagues at ease that you kind of share a common foundation, an interest in sports, and that kind of helps lubricate your relationship in other ways. And this is not anything I consciously did, because I've been a big fan of sports myself for a long time. But I think if you're a woman going into the fields, you might sort of cultivate some knowledge in this area just to sort of help set the stage for a broader relationship with your male colleagues.
Well, in that situation, what kind of support system do you rely on to maintain your energy and confidence? Are there networks you engage with, hobbies, or other sources of inspiration that keep you motivated?
Well, within the agriculture economic profession in the United States, um, there's a professional association, which is the Agriculture and Applied Economics Association. And within that group, there's a subset of women who work in the field called the Committee on Women and Ag Economics. And I have worked within that group and mutually supported other women in the field for a very long time. And I think that's a very valuable outlet for women to share what they've learned and what their concerns are, and it's mutually supportive. And I think it's a very valuable opportunity for women to meet other women in the profession.
And what advice could you offer to women who struggle with confidence when stepping into leadership roles? How can we overcome self-doubt and the feeling of inadequacy?
That's a difficult one, because it's sort of, the obstacles are real. They're not imaginary, and to overcome them, I frankly think women have to work much harder than anybody else just to get in that position. But I think the very fact that you are aware of the fact that you had to work harder to get that position should create some confidence in and of itself of your capability. So you've gotten where you've gotten through your own hard work, and recognize that, and let that estimation of your own self-worth support you.
Would you share a time when you faced a significant challenge in your career, how you navigated it, and what you learned, or how you grew from the experience?
I've been fortunate that I've been fairly successful in most of the things that I've done. Um, the one thing where I would say there was definitely a failure, but I would not accept much responsibility for the failure. I mentioned in my presentation that I had worked as a lobbyist. This was for an organization called the United States United Egg Producers. And this was for a piece of legislation that they had co-drafted with an animal rights organization called the United States Humane Society. And this was aimed at establishing a nationwide standard for how egg-laying hens were handled, housed in large operations in the United States. And they wanted to set a national standard so that it wouldn't have to be litigated in every state what those standards look like. And so my role was to go in and advocate for this legislation in every case with a representative of the Humane Society. And I worked on this project for about a year. And I thought we had a very strong case based on the economics and just sort of the moral issue of humane treatment of these birds. But unfortunately, some organizations among like the Farm Bureau, the National Pork Producers, and the Cattlemen's Beef Association were determined to stop us because they did not want to see the Humane Society with a political victory. And so egg production is an important economic activity, but it's not the biggest activity in any state in the country. I mean, for example, Iowa, which is my home state, there's a lot of egg production, but the hog industry is much bigger in Iowa, much more politically connected. And so they had a much more influence over the process than did the egg producers. And at the end of the day, we just couldn't make headway in the process, and we sort of threw in the towel. And so that was a failure, but it was, I would say, forces larger than we could control.
Okay, thank you. What is the impact of USA agricultural policy in the world?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the end of that question.
What is the impact of USA agricultural policy in the world we are living in today?
Well, I mean, when I think about U.S. agriculture, USAID engagement in agriculture, there's two ways that they do. One is at the emergency, the food aid level. And it appears that there is an effort to try to keep that intact. Although because of the way they've fired people and froze funds and have been very slow getting started again, it's still not entirely clear that those programs are running the way they're supposed to be. And that's unfortunate, but at least I think there's a recognition that it's a valuable thing for the United States to be doing. The other part is the one where Farm Journal Foundation is focused, is the longer term ag development. And USAID activity in that area has been almost entirely eliminated. And that is really unfortunate because, in my view, investing in longer term ag development in Africa and Central America and elsewhere in the world helps us help those countries become more resilient and more productive in their ag sectors and make them less vulnerable to natural disasters and weather shocks, and makes them less necessary for us to provide humanitarian aid in the future. And so it's actually cost effective for us to invest in ag development and research, because over the long run, that means we'll probably have to spend less on humanitarian assistance. But that seems to be a trade-off or a relationship that is not grasped by the people who are making these decisions, because they were, for example, the Feed the Future Innovation Labs, which are a big part of the ag research that was going on under the auspices of Feed the Future. And all but one of them have been canceled. There's one still at the University, Kansas State University, that's dealing with climate resilient cereals that's still up and running. But all the other 14 or 15 of them have lost their contracts and had to lay all their staff off. And to me, that's very short-sighted. It does not reflect, it reflects a misunderstanding of the value of research. And it's not just in agriculture that we're seeing a misunderstanding of the benefits of ag research, of research in general. So that's also true what's going on in terms of cutting funding for medical research in other areas.
Thank you, Stefan. My last question to you. What advice would you offer to CIMMYT on how it can better support and develop its women leaders?
I just think we need to continue to have conversations like this one, because the more light you can bring on a situation, the better understanding people can bring to bear. And we got to make sure that women are aware of the opportunities that are out there for them to take advantage of.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Over to you, Isabella.
Thank you. Thank you, Happy, for having this stimulating conversation with Dr. Stephanie Mercier. Thank you, Happy. Our first question is, where do you find inspiration or what excites you the most about your work today?
Well, when I was on the agriculture committee, I worked on a lot of issues that were less satisfying from a moral point of view. I mean, I worked, for example, on the crop insurance program, and there's a lot of money that's spent on crop insurance, and a lot of it goes to people who are already pretty wealthy. So it's not a matter of life and death for them, whether or not they have a certain percentage of their crop insurance premium subsidized for the federal government. And another concern in that sector was that a lot of the money that was spent on the crop insurance program ended up going to the companies that actually deliver the program to the farmers and not to the farmers themselves. So when I left the Ag Committee, I decided I was not going to work on behalf of those companies and the farmers who benefit from their crop insurance, but I wanted to work in an area where I thought my work might make a difference between prospering and not prospering. And the work that I did towards the end of my time on the Ag Committee on ag development sort of fit that bill really nicely.
Thank you very much. Do you have tips about how to engage in a room where you might be the only woman?
Well, I want to make sure that when I engage on an issue that I know what I'm talking about. Because there's no easier way for a man to discount a woman making a comment that if he can dismiss what they're saying as being not valuable or wrong. And so you want to make sure you do your homework going into those meetings. And I remember when I worked on the Ag Committee in particular, when I had a meeting with an outside group, I wanted to make sure I understood what their issue was and why they were wanting to meet with me, so that when I sat down with them, I would be able to ask questions that would show them that I had some understanding of the issue that they wanted to bring on the table. And so you really have to do your homework in these settings.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a question for Stephanie and Happy. As a woman in agricultural research, have you felt supported in your career development? Are there things that can be done to help get more women involved in agricultural science and keep them in their career?
Well, as you can tell from what I described, I did not exactly follow a traditional path as an ag economist, because the time I spent on the Hill is not a normal thing for an ag economist to do. But I think we need to do a better job of making sure women who are interested in these fields have a better understanding of what the opportunities are. And I've involved in a program through the Agriculture and Applied Economics Association, where we bring in 2 or 3 graduate students a year for a week visit to Washington, D.C., where they have where we set up meetings for them so they can learn more about the policy process and how they might engage in that field once they finish their graduate studies. And I think that's it might behoove other organizations to consider adopting the model that we have in terms of getting sort of early connections between graduate students and policy professionals, so those students have an opportunity to learn from the people who actually do the work on what it entails.
Yeah. So yeah, it's quite important. So Happy, so as a woman in agriculture research, have you felt supported in your career development?
Yes, for me, I feel supported not only with the women, also even the men behind, especially my father is supporting me very much on the career I do, on my brothers. So I feel supported. And in order to support other women, also we needed to inspire them. Sometimes we are the one made them to feel this feed is not for the women, this feed is for men. So we need to inspire them, we need to show them this is feed for everyone. Let us take it easy. Sometimes we complicate and make it like is a feed of the people who are not living in this world. But let's inspire them. Let's see what we are doing is touchable to the life of the people, and they can be inspired. So let us do things which is seen and people they can appreciate. It will save the life of the people. But I feel supported, not only with the women, also with the men. That is a great.
Thank you, Happy. So here is another question about from the slide. It says, this one is for Stephanie. We are in a moment where both international development and scientific research funding are being cut dramatically in the US. Are there things that international organizations like CIMMYT and others as the CGR to better make the case that science matters for improving lives? What would be your recommendations?
Well, I think in the current environment, what we at Farm Journal Foundation are doing is trying to make the case to the new administration that there are benefits beyond sort of the obvious humanitarian, moral, imperative kinds of reasons for engaging in agricultural development, but that agricultural development actually represents an investment in future market opportunities for U.S. producers. I mean, I think all three things are true, and when we've in the past gone to Capitol Hill to advocate for these policies, we've focused on all three of them. But for this particular administration and its policy preferences, shall we say, the one that sort of focuses and prioritizes the notion that when we invest in developing countries, we're creating future marketing opportunities for our own producers, is the one we think has the most likelihood of being successful. Because they keep saying, farmer first. This is the new slogan for the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, is farmer first. And we need to couch our arguments in favor of these activities using the language that they use.
Yeah, thank you so much. Here we have one comment and question in the chat from Monica Fisher. Hi, Stephanie. As a woman applied economist and a researcher whose interests include identifying interventions that advance women's representation in science, your talk really resonates and inspires me. Thank you. My question is similar to the last one. Given the current political climate in which the EI efforts are prioritized, do you have recommendations for how we can stay the course and avoid losing momentum in advancing women's representations in science?
Well, I think it's very clear we're not going to be able to rely on federal resources in that area. So we have to find resources from outside the federal government to do these things. And one of the things that I've done in the last few years, and this predates the second Trump administration, is I have established a scholarship in my name at my alma mater, Iowa State University, to help a female graduate student in my old department, the Department of Economics, to move forward. And I think private efforts to provide those opportunities are what we're going to have to focus on over the next few years, because those resources simply will not be available through federal programs as they have been in the past. I mean, obviously mine is a very small scale one, but there are lots and lots of resources available in philanthropy. We can only figure out how to access them and get them moving in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this question would be for both, for Stephanie and Happy. We often say that diversity strengthens teams. Do you have examples of when your voice as a woman scientist has brought an important perspective to a conversation?
Well, I mentioned in my presentation that I was involved in the writing of the language for the McGovern-Dole school feeding program. And one of the things we emphasized was that we wanted to make sure that as these programs were set up in various countries, that they should focus on making sure that they made sure that girls were prioritized, that not only were they hopefully encouraged to start going to school, but that the school feeding program would help provide resources to encourage them to stay in school. And so one of the things that was offered as an option, and I think a lot of the programs that have been operated over the last 20 years have used this option, is that not only do you provide a school lunch for the kids who are in school, but you then send them home with a ration that can help feed their family in the evening. Because we know that so much of the time when a household is really poor, the males in the household will get priority over the females in the household in terms of the first chance to eat whatever food is available during the day. And if the kid brings home food from school, then that sort of incentivizes that family, that household, to make sure that that resource keeps coming in by keeping that kid in the school. And so both the household and the kid benefit by that opportunity.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, Happy.
Yes, I can say my voice was included. I have involved in some nomination of the leader in the research from the past my history. I was working with the Tanzania Agricultural Research Institute. That was good time for me because when I received that email where we wanted to nominate people to lead some programs in the research, but we want you to nominate that people who to advise us which one can be better. To that I say, oh, I'm a woman, but something they feel I can do something, or I can even nominate the people who are good in the field of research. So that was a good time for me, and I feel proud on that.
Thank you, Happy. So the upcoming question is could be applied for both, for Happy and Stephanie. What have been the main obstacles of your that you have come across in your professional career, and what recommendations could you share with the young and mid-career women professionals who might be struggling with similar issues? And this one is related to leadership. What experiences have most shaped your your leadership style?
Well, I have to say that I really haven't had positions that would normally be described as leadership positions within an organization's hierarchy. I have led projects and task forces, and I consider that kind of role to be similar, but it's not necessarily recognized by people who are hiring that when you're leading a project or leading a task force, that requires similar skills to a full-time leadership position. And I think, I don't know how we change that mindset, but I think that would be very helpful to get acknowledgement that those kind of leadership roles are very important to the smooth running of an organization as well. And I mentioned we are actually doing holding a workshop at this year's AEA meetings, which are in a couple of months in Denver, a pre-workshop on developing leadership skills within the ag economics profession, and hope to have the chance to explore these issues even more, because certainly in ag economics, and I'm sure many other ag disciplines, there isn't much formal training on how to become a leader. So you sort of wing it until you get there. And it's not necessarily easy for other people to replicate the path that you followed. So having those formal training opportunities, I think, are going to be very helpful.
Happy?
I undergo through different training for the leadership, and also I have been mentored with some people who have trusted me. So they mentored me and they trusted me because I remember once when I given to lead a program, I was worried how I can do it. And but that time my boss said he become a director and leave the program. We said, I trust on you because I was the only woman in that program. All they are men, and that time they have a PhD. That time I was in Mercier. Say, I trust on you. You can do better. So he handed to me, and I remember sometimes there is the award. When I received the award, a good leadership or a good innovator in the work, I say, so I can do it. So I have been mentored with the people who trust on me, and always they said, you can do it. Although you are a woman, but you can do it, and we trust on you. So that is the thing which bring or build my leadership, and that is the motivation I have.
Thank you, Happy. This one is in Slido, and this one is addressed to Dr. Stephanie. You talk about the importance of being able to do work that matters. Sometimes it can be hard to keep that North Star. Do you have advice for scientists about how to keep their own values as their North Star?
Yeah, well, it's not always easy, as you said. But I think it's helpful when you can take a little bit broader view of your own individual work stream and envision how this could be, if it's successfully completed, beneficial to a larger group of people. And I remember many conversations that I had, especially when I was on the Senate Agriculture Committee staff, with former colleagues of mine, especially those I had worked with at the Economic Research Service. And they would ask me, why do you like working on Capitol Hill? And I would always tell them, when I worked on the Hill, when I worked at ERS, I analyzed policy. Now that I'm on the Hill, I get to help write it. And that's an impact that ag economists don't often get an opportunity to have, and we should seek out those opportunities and cherish them. And even if you don't have an opportunity like I had with the Senate Ag Committee, I think it's important for people who are, even if all they're doing is working on research that they hope to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. For people in my profession, certainly, what I tell them is if with your work, what you've gotten done with it is get it published in a peer-reviewed journal, and it has some policy relevance, you've only done half your job, because you need to figure out a way to get into the hands of people who actually make those decisions. And keep in mind that those people who make those decisions are not Ph.D. economists. They don't understand all the lingo. So you need to make sure that you do some sort of summary or briefing piece that lays out your findings in a way that is not filled with jargon and econometric language. And I don't know how many people actually paid attention to that, but that's something I've been telling my colleagues in the profession for a very long time.
Thank you, Dr. Mercier. Dr. Mercier, what are those words of wisdom that you would like the audience to take away?
Words of wisdom. That's a tough one. It's unfortunate that women have to work harder to get where they want to be in this profession, I think. But we also know that we as women always work harder than men, and so that shouldn't be a difficult job for us. So just tackle it and get the job done.
Thank you so much. Happy, do you have any recommendation, any message also that you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, I'm not far from Stefan. As a women, we can do many things and more things, and the big thing. So just to trust on ourselves and do better.
Yep. Yeah, trust yourself is a very good two-word way of describing working in these fields.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we are almost to finish. So any final message there, Dr. Stephanie Mercier, that you would like to share to close our conversation of today?
Well, if I can make a pitch, Isabel, I write a blog for AgWeb, which is associated with Farm Journal, which established our foundation, on a range of agricultural policy topics. And if anybody who is on this call would like me to add them to the list of the who gets linked to my blog, my email address was on the last slide, and if you guys could make that available to folks. I'm certainly willing to add anybody's email address to that list so that you can be regularly read my blogs.
Thank you very much. I think it would be very helpful for us, for our scientists, or for people that are getting in touch with CIMMYT to learn about your experience, because you have a lot of experience, long-term development, and so I think it is a very good example to follow. So thank you so much. On behalf of Dr. Brangovers, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank you so much for sharing with us your outstanding professional and personal journey. Thank you for being a catalyst of change. We also thank the audience that joined today, and we invite you for the following Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.